Hey everybody, welcome back to Lettermen Row. I am Austin Ward, joined by Jeremy Birmingham and Spencer Holbrook, and we're finally within a week and a half of Ohio State playing a football game. It feels like it's been 10 or 11 years since the last time they were on the field, but Ryan Day, Corey Dennis, and Justin Fields provided some updates. One more practice in the Horseshoe coming on Saturday for Ohio State, and then a couple more practice reports brought to you by Byers Auto on the way before October 24th, Ohio State, Nebraska. High noon on Fox in the Horseshoe. Listening to Ryan Day, my first takeaway was he started talking about like basic fundamental football stuff again. You can tell that that's when a game is really getting close, when a coach is talking about winning the turnover battle, protecting the football, making sure that you own the line of scrimmage, and avoiding penalties. So it feels like now it's starting to get real for Ryan Day.
Yeah, football's back when coaches get generic as hell. But I think that's a relatable because we've watched football over the last 6 weeks. And as much as Ryan Day said it at the end of the press conference today, it's been kind of torture for him and for the coaches at Ohio State and the players. But on some level, I can't help but think it's going to be a benefit to the Buckeyes to be able to see sort of the hiccups that everyone else has had and to say, hey, guys, look at this. Alabama's giving up 1,700 yards in a football game or however many they gave up. That might not be the actual number, but it felt like it. You can't just come out and expect to throw your helmet on the field and dominate games just because you're Ohio State. These other teams are in the same position the Buckeyes are, and you have a lot of questions coming up about what's going to happen. Hell, I mean, Virginia Tech is still playing with like 15 players not able to go, right? So obviously the Big Ten won't allow that, but there's going to be some changes, and you need to be prepared and focused on the little things. Ryan Day, that was kind of my takeaway as we've done this show in the last few weeks. The takeaway to me is that we can talk about Justin Fields as a Heisman Trophy candidate and the best quarterback in the country and all these other things, but the Buckeyes have to focus on the little things or you risk all that fight to get back to this season being totally worthless.
And I left out one important detail there, Spencer, where winning the turnover battle, line of scrimmage, tackling, as Alabama can attest, or LSU or any of these other historic or any Big 12 defense for that matter, the tackling has been suspect, and some of that is probably going to be unavoidable when you don't play football for 9.5, 10 months. But certainly it's not for a lack of emphasis at Ohio State right now.
Yeah, like if you look back, the first week Navy didn't tackle the entire offseason, looked horrible. Texas and Oklahoma still haven't figured out how to tackle, and it's been years they've been trying to practice this stuff. The SEC defenses look like Big 12 defenses right now. You didn't know how to tackle and how to approach that early in this offseason because you didn't want your guys to be hitting each other all the time. But Ohio State's making sure that is not going to be an issue. I can't imagine this team is going to be one of those teams that comes out and misses a lot of tackles just because – they seem to be putting such an emphasis on it, even more so than normal. Like, it's football. You're going to emphasize the need to tackle. And we saw it last year. They shored up their tackling from 2018 to 2019. I think it's going to be even more this year. They've got to get that down because Nebraska is the type of team where they're quick enough. If you miss a couple tackles, they're going to the end zone. And so you've got to be ready right off the bat, week one, to face a speedy team that can hurt you if you miss a couple tackles.
I think that's a really good point, is that Wan'Dale Robinson, Adrian Martinez, these are guys that if you don't play fundamentally sound, you will get beat for a long touchdown. And as we saw at Purdue in 2018, like you just give up on a play before it's over because you think you have a guy tackled, and all of a sudden players like Rondale Moore, Wan'Dale Robinson, et cetera, can make you feel bad about yourself.
I think that one of the key things, we're always trying to formulate a depth chart and figure out who's going in where. And I tried to, get Ryan Day to weigh in a little bit more on what positions might actually be uncertain. I think you can piece it together the way that we all have, that he talked about, Josh Proctor and Marcus Hooker at safety, and then threw in a couple other names of younger guys. We've talked a lot on this show the last couple of weeks about defensive tackle 3 technique in particular, about how that's going to work itself out. And Ryan Day said they were still hoping to get a couple guys back. Obviously, those couple would be Haskell Garrett and Teron Vincent. And then you're trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen at right tackle. The assumption has been that Nicholas Petit-Frere would be the starter, and he said, well, we're going to play him and Paris Johnson in the opener. They have one more day in the Horseshoe on Saturday, and then Ryan Day's talking about next week sitting down and knowing for sure who's going to be game ready. And if you are game ready, you're going to play. So, Berm, like in your mind, and you're listening today and you're talking about the coach speak that's getting ramped up now, how much do you think is really left to be settled here for the Buckeyes?
Probably not as much as he's letting, us see. I think that certainly we believe that, the cornerback position, who the top 4 guys are going to be that are going to rotate in. But as he said, they're going to play depth if they have depth. And that's one of the things that Ohio State has an advantage over everyone else in the Big Ten and most teams in the country, is that in this COVID manic that we're in, right, you just don't know. I mean, if someone can't play, the other guys need to be ready to go. And I think that it's a smarter approach to say, hell, everyone's going to play. Like, be prepared. He said the only guy that's going to play the whole game is Justin Fields. Like, that's it. So I think that they probably have a much better idea of the pecking order at each position than maybe he's letting on. But, safety, that is one spot where we're waiting for somebody to step up. It was nice to hear Chives' guy, Bryson Shaw, get thrown into the mix today. But there's certainly a few positions where you're like, okay, we know what's going to happen there. I mean, it's the offensive line's pretty well set. I think we can still assume that Paris Johnson will be the backup to start the year, but who knows if that is that way in week 3. That's the whole thing. Like, we don't know. This year is still going to be crazy.
That safety rate is certainly fascinating on the Byers Auto practice report at Lettermen Row, because Spencer has talked, he's got the Bryson Shaw camp. You, with your Arizona ties, probably deep in Lathan Ransom. And, anybody who's from Northeast Oklahoma, Tulsa, like Josh Proctor, they've got my vote. I think I probably got the edge over you two this season, but we don't know for sure how that's going to play out. We certainly have an assumption because Josh Proctor's now had 2 years in the program, experience in the Fiesta Bowl, even if it wasn't all positive. He's got to be that guy. This is really a make or break year for him in my estimation. And look, with the way that teams are throwing the football around this year, the way that they're probably ahead of the defense across the country, if you don't have somebody who can take over that Jordan Fuller role, boy, that's a big question mark to have.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to me because you're not talking about playing against a 2-star quarterback from Northwest Ohio against Bowling Green to open the season. You're opening against Nebraska. And so, especially in that safety role, you don't have the luxury of putting 4 different guys out there over the span of 4 quarters and figuring out who might be able to start to begin the Big Ten season in the first game of October or the last game of September. You're diving right into a Nebraska team that got embarrassed by Ohio State last year, is going to be looking to put some points on the board. It's just really interesting that, they don't have the luxury of piecing together everything as they go. This has to be, you're not dipping your toes in the water. You're doing a cannonball into the water, and you've got to be ready. And I think some of these position battles that you might have seen some guys interchange in the first few series, if they would have played Bowling Green or Rutgers in the first game, you don't get to do that. And I think that is something that they've got to get shored up in the next 11 days to prepare for what they're about to see.
Well, it hasn't exactly taken them long to blow out Nebraska in this series, if we're being completely honest.
I mean, you're right there, but I think this Nebraska team is a little bit improved. I'm not going to say that they're going to give Ohio State any sort of fight. I just think it's not the same as playing a Rutgers or a Maryland.
I think that you have to be prepared for Josh Proctor and these guys like him, Taraja Mitchell, those sort of dudes that have been like waiting to hit somebody really hard. I think my bigger concern is that because the way defense is played, the way that the officials are officiating, I'm more concerned for Ohio State if Josh Proctor gets called for targeting in the first quarter of the game against Nebraska than I am who needs to be ready to play behind him because of that. Like, that's what I think is the biggest concern. We know from a talent perspective what we've seen out of Josh Proctor in practice and heard about him over the last couple of years. Like, he's the closest to a Malik Hooker type of safety we've had discussions about it in Columbus since Malik moved down to the NFL. So he can make an impact on the field. He just has to stay on the field. And the last 2 images we have of Josh Proctor are him almost killing a quarterback at Wisconsin and then getting killed by a quarterback against Clemson. So, I think that he just needs to find some consistency and find a way to stay on the field.
Berm, you brought this up that Ryan Day said the only guy who's going to be, chiseled into that depth chart that's going to be on the field for an entire game is Justin Fields. Now, we know from having watched Ohio State for years that that's not going to be entirely the case when you look at this schedule. So when Corey Dennis and Justin Fields are talking about, the guys that are coming behind them, I think that it's a fascinating sort of debate for the Buckeyes to have. For the short-term interest of the program, you would want your true backup to be getting reps in case he has to take over. That's going to be Gunnar Hoke. He's more experienced. He knows the offense is year 2 for him in that. If you're looking at the long-term interest of the program and you're blowing out Rutgers, would you rather put out C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller and start sorting through, getting a head start with game reps and thinking about what's going to happen next spring as they vie to be this next starting quarterback? They don't want to talk about that publicly, but as well as I do that sort of conversation behind closed doors has been going on for months.
It has to be. I mean, the simple truth, again, and I hate to keep belaboring the point, but we have no idea what's going to happen this season. We've waited so long to get here, and we feel like, okay, football's now 10 days away. But again, 10 days in the year 2020 is like 350 years in a normal calendar. So you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, hell yeah. Someone has to be available. But the point is, if Justin Fields gets knocked out of a game because his helmet comes off in the middle of the third quarter, I think you're going to see Gunnar Hoke run out on the field and take the next step, right? Now, God forbid something worse happens. I think the Buckeyes have a serious debate about how you move forward, how you proceed, how Jack Miller and C.J. Stroud have developed, and what the value is of putting them in now versus Gunnar Hoke, or if you have a game or two where you need someone else to play. I think that we look at a much greater debate.
How do you handle it, Spencer?
I always err on the side of, if you're going to struggle on offense, and I'm not saying they will struggle with a different quarterback, but if you're going to have to go to another option, you should just play the youth, because you're at least getting them experience. And I've always stuck by that, and I think that's the way you have to go. I think it's valuable to have a guy like Gunnar Hoke in the room, and maybe he takes over for the first couple games, but eventually the talent of either C.J. Stroud or Jack Miller is going to seep through, and it's going to take over anyways. So you might as well, throw them in the water, because they're not – it's either put them in that position right now or put them in that position next spring. And you might as well get live bullets flying game reps for them now, because that's way more valuable than having Gunnar Hoke in there, at the beginning. Like I said, I just think one of those freshmen would take over anyways. And I think it's more valuable to get those guys playing time as soon as possible.
Spencer Holbrook, noted young person.
He's always believed it, Berm. He's always believed it.
But he's right. I mean, the fact is, if something's going to happen eventually, it should probably happen immediately. And this year is a free year for these guys eligibility-wise. You don't really lose much by playing them. But again, that really all depends on the entire context of the season. Is the playoff no longer an option? Or, do these things, something else falling apart? So I think a lot of those debates and decisions come down to the circumstances that are, happening at that given moment. But again, we just don't have any idea, because 2020 is amazing.
We'll start to get a much better idea of that when the Buckeyes are playing a real live game for the first time since December. It's only 11 days away, thank God. Lettermen Row cannot possibly wait much longer to see Ohio State back in action. That's coming soon. We're going to get to cover all of that and some more. 9 games on the schedule. Looking forward to the possibility of 11 to break down right here on the Byers Auto Practice Report. Jeremy Birmingham, Spencer Holbrook hanging out with me. As always, I'm Austin Ward. We'll see you next time at Lettermen Row.